about. So thank you all so much for spending a little bit of your Tuesday evening with us. My name is Jean Avison, and I, along with Becky Martin, co-chair of the Central Pacific Conference Committee on Ministry. And part of our charge in that role is to develop and maintain clergy compensation guidelines for our authorized ministers in the conference. And we spent a lot of time in the last year updating it and researching and all the things that hopefully will make your job a little bit easier. It's still got a lot of moving parts, but we hope you will find the information helpful today. And I noticed many of you have signed up for our second webinar, which will be a week from tonight. And that will be a very different format in that we will be having a panel discussion of really amazing people who have all different kinds of experience with clergy compensation. And hang on. Okay. Why am
Adam, I think you need to be muted.
Adam just muted himself, so he's good.
Okay. Thank you. I'm trying to connect my headset. Oh, wait. No.
Oh. What did I do?
Okay, my apologies. All right, we have 24 people on, so we're going to get going. If you have not already, if you would put your church name in the chat with your role that brought you here today, that would really help us to see who's here. As I said, my name is Jean Avison, and I'm the co-chair of the Committee on Ministry. We're hopefully going to have a busy time in the next 50 minutes. And so if you have questions as we move forward, please feel free to put them in the chat. But I want to tell you that this week, it's about the compensation guidelines and sort of the mechanics of the whole thing. Next week is going to be more the brainstorming and troubleshooting and getting a lot of your concerns about clergy compensation in discussion with people who have more experience than I do. So if you have those types of questions, I would ask you to hold them to next week, because we have a panel of really talented folks to chat with you about all the challenges of clergy compensation. But today, we just want to get you familiar with some of the moving parts of clergy compensation and help you feel more comfortable, at least getting to the information that you need and understanding what you're reading. And if you have specific questions about aspects of the clergy compensations, like what it is or how it works, and we don't cover it, please put your question in the chat. Joining me today is Jeff Pratt. Jeff, there you are. And Jeff is the conference treasurer, but he also is, I believe I got this straight, the treasurer of Clackamas UCC, and he is the architect of the spreadsheet that has been a game changer for the clergy compensation process. We've always had pencil and paper and calculator before, so this is a quantum leap forward. Okay, so let's talk about, am I shared? Yes.
I'm hoping you can share, and I think I've got you host, Jean.
Okay. There we go. Yay.
Are we working?
I hope so. Can
Good.
you all see this? Yes, I can't see
Mhm.
many people. So, um, just to start out, all of you know that clergy compensation is important because you all have clergy to compensate. However, um, for those of you who are in search, it's an integral part of your uh, building of your church profile and all the things that you need to prepare for evaluation of clergy candidates in your local church. Also, for church treasurers and finance teams, this is really helpful to go through when you're preparing your budget for the coming year, which I know we're in the midst of budget season. So it's something that is extremely important. Most of all, because I'm going to come back to total compensation, because we all know that our clergy are hardworking folk, and we need to do our best to try to develop a fair and just compensation package for our clergy. And it's about our covenant with our pastor. Our pastor is covenanted with us to provide leadership and learning and all the things, and it's our part of the covenant to provide that underpinning and support financially to help them do their job the best they can. I'm sure most of you have been or are employed in the non-church world, other than those of you who are clergy who are attending. And I think that it's important to delineate the difference between how a clergy is compensated in the terms of total compensation. In the business world, total compensation means pay and benefits, and all the things that go into your health insurance, disability, those sorts of things. Um, and in the case of total compensation for our clergy, that entire dollar package includes cash salary and benefits, but it also includes the housing. And I know that the housing is a big deal, especially in the Portland metro area and the prices of real estate. We're going to talk about each of these components as we go through the guidelines. And I use the word guidelines. This is a magic word. Most people understand it, but some don't. Remembering every church is different, every clergy is different. And that coming together of those two parties is going to be different in every scenario. So all we have tried to do is come up with guidelines. Guidelines are not set in stone. They are meant as part of the negotiation process and a bout of conversation. So it's a starting place. So it's recognizing the differences and honoring them in each of the transactions that you all will be embarking on or have embarked on. So a little background on the fact that we just don't choose this information out of the air. It was a very deliberate process. The one person that I have not called out yet to give thanks and gratitude for is Judy Davis, who is the treasurer at White Salmon. And Jeff and Judy and I worked very hard to not only put this together, but also to research. We looked at a lot of our fellow conferences around the country to try to understand their philosophies and approaches to compensation. We looked at comparable job data uh, based upon higher education and experience. And then we reviewed the existing CPC guidelines, which hadn't been updated since 2019. And that was partly due to the pandemic. But we worked very diligently to try to get all this information together. Once we did, we asked for other eyes to look on it because I don't know about you, and if you proofread something that you've written, you may or may not see what you've done correctly or incorrectly. And I am the first one to say I can't proofread my own things. So we had pastors and our conference minister. We had people from the national setting of the church take a look at it to make sure that we were within where we should be, and here we are. So the project goals for clergy compensation in this round was to make it easy for you all to get to the information, to make it self-service, that you didn't have to find or have someone send you a document, that you could find what you needed on our website. Another reason to do that is to keep information up to date. And an example of that would be the Social Security Administration just released the COLA for 2025. Now, that's going to affect tax situation in 2026, but it's important to keep up on these things. And our team is going to reconvene to take another look now that we've lived into these just a little bit, to see whether there are other tweaks that we need to make. And we're going to be taking a long, hard look at the housing calculations, and if we need to do some more due diligence around that because of the obvious issues with real estate. First time in the history of clergy compensation, we are providing information from all 3 states rather than just for Oregon. And one of our goals was to keep it simple. None of us live in this world 24/7, and it's important to be able to have information that it's hopefully easy to understand. And we're most excited about providing an automated calculator tool, and that's courtesy of Jeff Pratt, and he's going to be taking you through that in a little bit. So as I say, hopefully no calculator or hair loss will be necessary in this process. So where do you find all this information? And that would be on the CPC website. And I'm going to stop sharing and get to my website right now so that you can take a look at where you can find the guidelines today. Our CPC website, if you do not inhabit that often, I would encourage you to do it because it's very, very helpful, has a ton of information, it's kept up to date. And for some reason, there we go. So let's take a look here. Hopefully many of you have already found this information, but if you look on the CPC website under CPC ministry teams, you can find it under the Committee on Ministry, or you can go over to CPC resources and select Committee on Ministry resources. And I want to spend just a couple of minutes sharing with you that there's a lot of information available out there. Something that many of you who do evaluations of your clergy should be aware of: the marks of faithful and effective authorized ministers. Probably your pastor has let you know that these exist. They are part of the UCC Manual on Ministry, which was redone in 2018. And it is everything about authorization for ministry, including the marks of faithful and effective authorized ministers and the UCC Ministerial Code. For those of you who are in search, we have a sample call agreement. And also we have clergy covenant templates, and I can answer questions about that later. But I want to dive in to the clergy compensation. And when we went through the exercise of updating the dollar figures, there were some things that were in place previously that we thought were valuable to keep. And that is the various stages of ministry, which we'll look at in the next document, and also basing the compensation on the size of your church membership. because not all churches are large. And I will say most of the churches in the Central Pacific Conference are not large in like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. They tend to be on the small side, usually under 300, more like a lot of our churches are more 100 to 150. And keeping that in mind is really an important consideration. Now, a lot of people have looked at this and go, what? And these are shown in thousands because I didn't want to get tied up with a bunch of zeros. Okay. So these are our starting points. And again, this is a negotiation conversation. This is not something that's arbitrary, and using the term guidelines again. So how do we use those numbers? If we come down to our document that goes through guidelines, there is a very comprehensive user guide that takes you through the stages of ministry. And one of the things I want to say about the stages of ministry, sometimes you have clergy coming to you that are a second career, that may have had other experience in other nonprofit worlds, or vast experience in other areas that really add to the benefit that you get from their clergy experience, even though as a pastor they may not have years and years. So keep that in mind as well. Again, an additional tool to determining salary are reviewing the UCC marks for faithful and effective ministry. This is a very comprehensive tool. Please do not hold your pastors to checking every single box on every single one. They are a starting point. They're aspirational. They are the sort of thing that is lived into over long periods of time. So when we get into housing allowance, this is probably the most challenging part of clergy compensation. And we did our best to do research and come up with comparative guidelines around this, but we also understand the challenges. So as I mentioned, we are already beginning research to getting through and updating as necessary the housing allowance, because we know that is a pain point for many. For those of you on church councils, I want to point out, if you may or may not be aware, that according to the IRS, the value of annual housing allowance must be formally authorized at the annual meeting of the church or by the appropriate church board each year prior to the receipt of the allowance by the minister. And the approval must be officially recorded in your church minutes and be retained in the church files. This is between your pastor and the IRS, in the sense of you are not required to determine which percentage of housing and compensation are the pastor is choosing. It can change over time. If a home is purchased, or we're renting, or whatever changes in the life of the pastor, that can change the annual appropriation for that's for the purposes of the IRS. I don't think we did a little survey, and I don't believe there is any church in our conference that is currently using a parsonage, but we do know that there are those pastors who are renting versus buying, for whatever reason that happens to be. And we pointed out an equity development plan. And this is something that the church may opt to do or not do. But if the pastor is either renting or living in a parsonage, it's really a disadvantage to them in the long run if they don't have the ability to purchase something in the future. So I encourage you, to take a look at this and discuss it in your committees to decide if this is something that you want to be about. It is a good and faithful thing to consider. And so we wanted to leave that for your to choose how you want to do it. I mentioned cost of living allowance, the COLA that the Social Security Administration does every year. We took that into account for 2024 tax year. For 2025, the cost of living allowance will be 2.5%. That was just published by the Social Security Administration. One thing that is a huge difference from those of us who were employed in a business, if you were self-employed, then you know this, that our clergy pays what would be considered the employer side of the Social Security offset. So 15% of the salary paid has to be put into Social Security. And it is something that is not multiple choice. It has to happen. Moving on to benefits. Benefits are important, especially since we have so many choices. We have pension plans and annuities that are offered through the United Church of Christ, but we also know that people have other avenues that they invest. So they may or may not be participating, but there are percentages that we have to keep in account for these annuities and pensions so that our pastors can be made whole in their retirement. Health and dental insurance, we do offer through our insurance board health and dental insurance. There is a paragraph in here that I'm highlighting right now that is discussing the Affordable Care Act. And that's something that, again, is going to be highly dependent upon the pastor's situation, and that it may be variable. But we do recommend that local churches pay 100% of the medical premium for full-time ministers and their families. And that is full-time. And again, if you don't have a full-time pastor, many times there is a minimum of 50% time that is a requirement for the coverage. I know it is specifically for the pension. There may be optional vision benefits, but they will have to be purchased by the employee or employer. Again, a negotiable item with the pastor. The pension boards offer a flexible spending account with the UCC health plan benefit, which is a very helpful thing for taking care of some of the out-of-pocket costs that can occur during a year. And the pension boards of the UCC, we offer, there's a link in this document for you to go out and see what those are and what options are available. UCC Life and Disability is a percentage that is calculated, and Jeff has this taken into account in the spreadsheet. Minister liability insurance, typically that is handled under the church's current insurance policy. If you have doubt, you can always ask your insurance person to make sure that you have that as a part of your church's coverage. There are some state-specific employment programs. So we have workers' comp and unemployment for the churches in Idaho, and we have links to those various government agencies to get that information. For Oregon, we have workers' comp, unemployment, and we also have paid leave in Oregon and a transit tax, which clergy are exempt from. Churches in Washington, we have workers' comp, unemployment, and Washington paid family and medical leave. And something that's unique to Washington is the Washington Cares Fund, which is a mandatory participation long-term care insurance fund. Everything that I'm now going to talk about is something that the search committee or your finance committee should be aware of and need to address how you're going to manage this. Typically, a church will pay for a background check for a pastor who is coming to your church, and also reasonable moving expenses. We also have automobile reimbursements, and that is something that again is a good and fair and just thing to do because the pastor is doing the church's business in a lot of different places. Professional expenses, a lot of churches set aside some of expenses that go along with study leave or for other books or subscriptions that the pastor might find important to their work. Also, continuing education. It's important that the pastor have those opportunities for growth and for just personal growth that is even outside what you would consider the role of the pastor. However, it's the whole person, and it's really important to be mindful and um, consider of those things. Okay, we're moving along. Technology, cell phone, internet, all those things. Obviously, your church office offers internet. It's important that you offer your pastor equipment for them to do their job. Typically, one will have their own, but it's not fair to ask them to use their own unless they choose to do it. But again, that's your conversation that you have with your pastor. We give time off information typically as a recommendation, and it's up to you as the local church to negotiate that with your pastor, but we've given you some guidelines there, as well as sick and personal leave and community and denominational leadership and civic service if you're for jury duty, and parental leave for those that have care for a spouse or a partner or a child. And the only note there is parental leave cannot be taken in addition to any state leave program. State programs that pay will reduce the amount the church needs to pay to cover full salary. Sabbatical. This is something that hopefully you are accruing in your budget to be able to cover expenses for the time when your pastor will be away on a sabbatical. This is for both full and part-time pastors. And this is because the full salary and housing and benefits are going to continue to be paid throughout the sabbatical, but your sabbatical leave, your church is still going to need coverage of clergy. Our pastor just went on a 3-month sabbatical, and we had pastoral leadership for the time that had been, and the money used to pay them was out of that sabbatical leave bucket on our, that's not a technical term, on our budget. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm hoping that Jeff Pratt, that you can share your screen and take it from here to take us through the actual calculations. And I apologize, I have not been able to see all of the screens. So while Jeff is talking, I'm going to take a look if you have questions that you have put in the chat. So Jeff, are you there?
I'm here.
Wonderful, thank you.
I'll see if I can share, and I'm going to be running the calculator. I have a local version of it here, so rather than try and run it off the website at the same time.
Okay.
Mhm. There it is. So, yeah, as Jean mentioned, this is a tool. It's intended to make it easy to do things like run different scenarios of for if you're like developing a budget or developing a call document or something like that. The purpose here is to sort of automate all the little things like calculation of annuity amounts, et cetera, and social security offsets. So you don't have to run them on your handheld calculator. So if you bring it up, the first part of it is the full-time or part-time status. And you can go ahead, you can fill this whole thing out and then go back and play with this particular feature. The versions that we pre-plugged in here are 3/4, 3/5, and a half. Those are not the only options. You can figure out somebody for 17 or 72 hundredths if you want. You just have to do that part yourself. These are handy stopping points. And then of course here's these the church membership size ranges. These are right out of the standards document as it was developed previously. These four levels. So you just pick the one that corresponds to your church and away you go. So once knowing those two, you can go into this matrix and pick off a value here for, we're calling it suggested initial cash salary because it is just a suggestion. You can override it, and sometimes you want to come back after you've done this whole thing and change this number. And that's how you would do it, is I plug it in there. I'll let you do that. I'm having trouble because oh, there we go. I was covering up my scroll bar. So then there's this whole little calculation of the initial suggested housing allowance. There's three options. The first one is the traditional. If somebody is paying a mortgage on a home that they are buying. And the suggestion is to take a median price of a home, a full family home in the church's area, plug it in here, and then it figures that just as a guesstimate, 1% of that value per month, and then times 12 is the yearly amount. That if you look and you do a calculation of an actual mortgage, it's less than 1%, but there are actual housing costs, of course, that are in addition to that. There's home insurance, there's maintenance. So the 1% per month thing is kind of a standard that we find all over the place. So that's what was put in here. The other calculation you can do, of course, is if you are providing a parsonage, you can go in here and enter the amounts of the utilities, telephone, etc. And then it will calculate it based on that.
Right now, I don't think we have any parsonages in the conference, so I think we're okay.
Okay. Yeah, because it looks like we've got a problem in there anyway. So, and then the third option is if somebody is renting, then what you put in here is their actual monthly rental plus utilities plus any other additional housing costs that they might have. Say, just picking a number out of the air. And it will accordingly, multiply that by 12 and plug it in here. I'm going to go back to the other version. Once we know a theoretical salary and a theoretical housing amount, we have a basis, technical term. Because a lot of the other stuff is dependent on this number for the salary basis. For instance, if you do the standard UCC annuity amount, that's this number times 14%. And similarly, there's a percentage that's the standard LEI amount. I forget what the percentage is. And the Social Security offset, which is like 7.5%. If you are using the option 3 up here, and you're putting in an actual rental cost, and in this case, the clergy person is not accumulating equity in a home that they are buying. So the suggestion is that we supply this housing equity plan, and say put in 5% there, and that figures out what that is for the year. So then salary basis plus these calculated additions is a subtotal there. Next section is a whole little thing about health insurance, and this ended up being a lot more complicated than I thought it would be, because of the fact that so many clergy people are actually retired and already on Medicare in addition to their church gigs. So forgive me because I can't remember exactly. Yeah. There's a section for if somebody's just below retirement age, just working straight out. If the clergy person and their whole family, whoever we're covering with this health insurance, is all on Medicare, that's where this section applies. And if there's a mix, if the clergy person is on Medicare, and their spouse may be on Medicare, but their children aren't, and they're still covered, these all factor out into different combinations of coverage. And so this section figures all those out and applies the appropriate one based on what you tell it. I just happen to have it filled out here for 2 adults and the UCC insurance plan. And why is it doing that? Okay. Oh, I see. Those are overrides. Never mind. This is for 2 adults using the UCC insurance plan. This is what the yearly cost would be. So you take the benefits cell from above and add this to it, and you're getting what the total of all the salary and housing and benefits are. There's a little section here where you can plug in professional expenses, continuing ed, etc. And there are 3 free forms for things that I had figured I wouldn't have thought of, but might come up. Things like technology that Gene had mentioned. So if there's something there, for instance, this just as an example, I put in one that's $600 for entertainment. If you want to pay for if the pastor takes to somebody to lunch, for instance, or something like that. You could put something in there for technology support too. So by the time you get down here, let's see. Change this back. By the time you get down here, the initial housing is 36,000. So this defaults to the housing amount that was calculated above and the salary amount that was calculated above. And within the limits of the total compensation package, you can, based on what the pastor is able to and wants to consider tax deducted for housing, he can move this threshold up and down. So if he thinks, well, the housing estimate here might be a little high on what my maintenance costs are, he can reduce this. If he thinks, I've got some expenses coming up that are going to increase that, he can increase this. The limit being that these two numbers still have to add up to the salary basis. So he can bump this down. And the salary part goes up. So what you can do is, using this tool, you can bounce back and forth between different sections of this spreadsheet and run out scenarios that you can do a look-see. If we do this, this is what it's going to cost, and this is what the pastor's take home is going to be, and this is what the insurance is going to be. You can change things and see what the differences are and play around with it until you get something that looks good to the finance committee and the pastor and whoever's running the spreadsheets. And that's
one of the
basic
beauties
idea.
of this spreadsheet that Jeff created is that it downloads to your computer. So you can save it multiple times with multiple scenarios. So it's not something that you have to remember what you had there before. So we had a question from Ruth Reeder asking, is it possible to get something that shows us the calculations behind the spreadsheet? And I don't know whether you want to respond to that, Jeff. My comment about that is, we tell you what percentages are used in the various steps of calculation. There are some things that you're going to have to look up for your pastor's particular situation when it comes to the insurance board or UCC health insurance and so forth. But as far as, like unemployment and all those calculations, the percentages are in the document that supports the clergy compensation items listed. I'm not sure that answers your question. Short of knowing Excel really well,
So,
I don't. One of the reasons why we did this was to save you from having to deal with understanding all of the calculations behind it. It was just enabling you to plug in numbers.
yeah, I appreciate that. It's sort of transparency, I think, to not have to then look at your numbers on the form and then look to see, is that how it would work if I were recalculating it, and to have a clear understanding. So I do
Okay.
use Excel, and so for me, I like to see what's behind in the engine. But I can also work to recreate it to figure it out that way too. Is another option.
Well, no, I think I can't remember if I unprotected this copy of the worksheet or not. because on this version, you can actually look and see what the formulas are.
I'll check that on mine.
Yeah. If it won't let you do that
No,
because it's
It
protected.
doesn't, I can't
I-
select anything.
Oh, okay. This one.
Only the orange boxes. You protected it, which is smart.
Okay. Um,
And
I could probably work up a document or a spreadsheet that would have those in, just as a read only.
that'd be great if I mean, sometimes you can just ask it to show your formulas.
I'll look into that too, because
is a
that would be useful.
possibility. Yeah,
That's some good feedback.
thank you.
When I have years of experience with Excel, but I did it mostly as an engineer. And I was using it to calculate waveforms and troubleshoot database things and stuff. So I never did any of this fancy stuff of drop downs and selecting out a matrix and stuff until this project.
Then you
So
had fun.
yeah, I did.
Thank you.
So if some of this is clunky, that's why.
Another question that we received, Jeff, hopefully one of the two of us can answer this. Can we use the price of the house the minister owns to calculate the housing allowance rather than the median price of the area?
I say absolutely.
Yeah, I do too. And
actually, with one of the things, I think you could also go and find, for instance, if the housing needs are not of a full family, you could find the average price of a smaller home that would fit the needs of the pastor, or a condo or something, and use either the mortgage, the purchase price of that, or the monthly rental for that in lieu of the full size family home value.
and then last question that I've seen so far is, how are housing funds dispersed? See how they're calculated, but do these funds get to the pastor? This is part of their total compensation, and your payroll program that your church uses will calculate all these things to pay out as is appropriate each month and take the deductions that are appropriate. But the cash salary and the withholding and the social security offset are paid out just, and the housing allowance is parsed out by pay period as well.
And there's documentation. I should probably put that in here. The housing allowance goes on in a separate box on the W-2 form.
Yes, it does.
So that the IRS doesn't get confused. But
And it should match up with what the pastor is using on their taxes, so that there's no
Right.
disconnect there.
Yeah. Because
So,
for instance, the social security offset is regular old income. That's
yes,
not exempt in any way. So it
no,
gets taxed on it. There's taxes on the tax on that. So
right.
not great.
Okay, so I'm going to replace your share, Jeff, and I really appreciate Jeff's expertise in all the things that magic that he did. And Ruth, your question was really good, so we will work on that. Like I said at the outset, this is a work in progress, and we really appreciate the feedback and the as you get into this, as you use it. Obviously it's not something you're going to sit with every day. We're going to live with this thing for as long as we're around in our roles, and hope that we can continue to make it better for you and better for the people that follow you. So I really appreciate you coming today. I took a look at the numbers. I think we had 24 on today, so that's awesome, especially for this time of day. We wanted to get it so that we could hopefully tap in people who had day jobs to be able to join us. This webinar has been recorded, and we will put it out on the CPC YouTube channel. and hope that those of you who are here will join us for webinar number 2. When the numbers don't add up, brainstorming the challenges of clergy compensation in small and rural churches. We will have with us next week Reverend Roberto Ochoa from the National Setting of the Church, whose portfolio is serving the needs of small and rural churches, as well as some of our own CPC all-stars. We have a couple of pastors, a couple of treasurers, church treasurers, and even a moderator who's going through an active search. So we hope we'll have some meaty and not necessarily answers, but the ability to just discuss as a team all the things that you are dealing with as in your negotiations, or whatever place you are in your budget process. And we'll have some wisdom in the room to help. So if you haven't already signed up, I've given you a QR code. Just point your camera on to that, and that will take you to the registration page if you have not registered already. We will be looking at the participant list and sending out the link for next week's calls. So be on the lookout for that closer to the date. Thank you so much for joining today. We really appreciate your coming, and I'm going to stop sharing so I can see all of you all before we say goodbye. But we really are so grateful for your diligence around this topic, and thank you for your time, and look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.